Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you are new here. I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another true crime and makeup episode. Oh yeah. Today we are covering a crazy ass case. It's been requested for a long time, but honestly I was just like, nah. But today we are covering Richard Kuklinski. Kuklinski? Is that his name? Am I saying that wrong? I might be. I've said it wrong the entire video, so bear with. I believe it's Richard Kuklinski, but he's better known as the Iceman. Now this guy, he had mob ties with the Gambino family. He was a murder for hire hitman. He was just all kinds of bad news, and we're going to be diving into everything today. A question that remains on everyone's lips: was this guy a glorified liar? Or did he in fact have the hundreds of victims that he claimed he did? Before we jump in, if you are new here, hi, my name is Anna. I am a certified japper. I come on here every Wednesday and Sunday and I talk about a true crime case that is keeping me up at night. Because if it's on my mind, it has to be on yours too. And if true crime is your jam, then I highly suggest you subscribe, get the notification bell on, because I'm here for you twice a week, every single week. And it's free. What could be better? Any details you need regarding me, myself and I will all be listed down below in the description. Let me tell you all, this case is a humdinger. But without any further rambling or any further ado, let's get into the horrifying, crazy ass case of the Iceman. So, Richard Kuklinski, before he was nicknamed the Iceman, before he was racking up body counts that would make a cartel blush, and well before HBO was rolling out documentaries like he was some celebrity mobster, Richard Kuklinski, he was nothing but a severely troubled child who had an absolute hatred for anything that lived and breathed the same air as him, and unfortunately this would include his own family. So, let's jump right back to the beginning when this monster was hatched from its egg. So, Richard Leonard Kuklinski, he was born on April the 11th of 1935, and if you know me and you know my birthday, I'm April the 10th, and as an Aries, we're no claiming this guy. So he was born in Jersey City of New Jersey, and he was born to his father Stanley Kuklinski and Anna McNally. And you'll be thinking, alright Anna, like, everything sounds normal so far. Nothing to worry about. Strap in kids, strap in. So his father Stanley, he was a Polish immigrant and he was working as a brakeman for the Delaware Lackawanna and Western Railroad. If I've said that wrong, I've said it wrong. You know me, pronunciation, know my strong suit. Now, this was a very demanding job, and let's just say Stanley, he felt the pressure of the demands and he had a short fuse. This guy, it was like he was a stick of dynamite, and you've lit the string and you're just waiting on it exploding. Stanley was also described as being a raging alcoholic, and let's just say his parenting sort of strategy wasn't gentle. And to be quite frank, he didn't really specialise in parenting at all because he was a terrible father. So now let's talk about Anna McNally. We're all hoping and praying that she's going to be a lot better than Stanley, who is an abuser. So Anna, Richard's mother, she was a very devout Irish Catholic. She would spend so much of her time praying. She would tell anyone and everyone how much she loved Jesus. But let me tell you, the only thing this woman loved more than Jesus was beating the living crap out of her own children. Yep, this devout Catholic woman, she would beat her young children with brooms, pot handles, pans, like some kind of live action Rapunzel. One time she had hit Richard so hard with a broom that it snapped in half. Both parents were physically and mentally abusive to their children, and Richard did later state that his family home, his family life taught him one thing, and that was that violence was normal. Violence was part of everyday life. Good job with the parenting. Stanley and Anna, just knocking it out the park. Now, as I've stated, Richard, he had siblings. There was another 3 of them. And this is where things are going to get so incredibly dark. So he had this brother called Florian. One day, Florian, a young child, dies. Tragically young. And I know what you're thinking, this must have been some awful tragedy, something awful happened in the family. But what had actually happened is Stanley, the father, he had beat Florian to death. Richard witnessed this. He witnessed his own brother be beat to death by his father. What message does that send? Richard was only 5 years old when he witnessed this. Could you imagine the horror and the terror? That shows him that the people that he should be able to trust are actually people that endanger him. And the excuse that was used by the parents as to why Florian had died, well, he fell. He just fell over. Okay, Patricia, we're guessing that it wasn't you. And the thing is, he witnessed his brother die, right? Which is just absolutely dreadful, like unimaginable. But he also witnessed how his parents lied about it. Lying was also normal, and you could lie about some of the biggest frickin' things in the world and it didn't really matter. If his mum and dad was doing it, surely he could as well. And this lethal cocktail of beatings, the religious abuse, and the parental sadism, this would be enough to mess up any damn child. Richard, he didn't just internalise this violence. He very much perfected it himself. By the age of 6, Richard was already showing that he had something wrong with him. There's something wrong with little Rich, because this 6-year-old child, he would find stray cats and stray dogs in the street and he would kill them. And not only would he kill them, but it was said that he would torture them, he would throw them into furnaces, or he would beat them until they died. And I'm really sorry to talk about this because I can't stand talking about that kind of thing. I've got my 2 little cats who are my absolute babies, they're my absolute world, and they're so defenseless. I mean, I know they can fight off each other, believe me, Bear and Buddy, they're always fighting each other, but when it comes to humans who are like giants to these little cats or these little dogs, it must be absolutely terrifying. And Richard, he would later state that killing these defenseless animals gave him such a feeling of power, this feeling of control that he couldn't get anywhere else. I don't know if this will like surprise or shock any of you, but when Richard was at school, he wasn't a teacher's pet. Hard to believe, I know. But he was quiet, he was shy, and listen, I'm saying he was quiet, but he had a volcanic temper that would erupt at the tiniest, smallest insult. He was also incredibly big for his age. I don't mean like big. Well, I do mean big. He was quite broad, but he was tall. He was low-key enormous for his age, and that made him very intimidating. The children at the school, they kind of feared him. But time is pushing on, and these acts of violence, they are not getting any better. They're actually getting worse. By the age of 13, Richard, he would beat a child at school with a wooden dowel. And this beating was so bad that this child nearly died. Now, listen, don't get me wrong, this child had called him a slur because he was Polish, which is disgusting, out of order. You do not say stuff like that unless you are a crappy human being, okay? But, and this is just me thinking out loud, I don't know if this calls for Richard trying to turn this young boy's skull into a canoe. Seems a bit brutal, you know, maybe tell the teachers, tell your mum and dad, maybe don't go to that sort of extreme violence. Now, the young boy who had actually said the slur and then got the beating that nearly killed him, his family did go to the authorities, and the authorities did absolutely nothing, as we can probably imagine. It's a tale as old as time, but Richard never really seemed to get in any proper trouble, anything that would teach him a lesson for these violent outbursts that were, you know, nearly rendering people dead. And I mean, we have the school life, and then if we go back home, we have this live action horror film taking place. It's not a good combination, and it doesn't make for a good upbringing. So Stanley, remember the father, he obviously struggled with alcoholism, which is a horrific disease for anyone to struggle with. But this guy, he would go away from home for days on end, right? He was just drinking, whoring his way through town because, let's just say, he wasn't very faithful. And then he would come home, he would beat Richard, Anna, and the other children simply for breathing. Bearing in mind, he's the one that's been on like a 5-day bender. He comes home and he thinks that he should be annoyed with them. And the thing is, Anna would get the beating off Stanley. And then Anna's so rage-filled that she's trying to think of how she can get rid of her rage, and she would take it out on Richard, her child. She would make him kneel on a salt-covered floor for hours on end whilst he begged and pleaded with his mother to please let him stand up. I don't know if this woman thought child abuse was some kind of religious sacrament that meant she was allowed to do it, but she's got it very twisted if that's what she believes. Richard at this point has it ingrained in his mind that the only way to survive, the only way to get by, is to never feel anything. He had learned to shut down emotionally, mentally and physically in order to protect himself. And he had built this mask that was robotic, detached, emotionless, and deadly. Now, by the time he had hit his teenage years, he had already committed his first murder. Allegedly, according to Richard, but let's get into that. So, Richard had claimed at the age of 14 years old, he had bet a bully to death with a steel rod and then threw his body in the South Bronx. But, police, they never discovered a body. There was no child, no bully reported missing. No body, no arrest, no investigation. And we'll see this a lot with Richard. You know, he likes to talk the talk. And don't get me wrong, he has walked the walk many a times, but some of his stories, they seem to be a bit embellished or completely made up. But, you know, Big Richard, he's still going along with this. He's telling people, you know, this was the moment that I realised I could do this and get away with it. He then went on in later interviews and he had said the following: I was a nobody. I wasn't tall, I wasn't good looking, but I knew one thing. If I hit someone, they stayed hit. When I killed that first man, I felt like I had accomplished something. And I just, you know, people describe this guy as being enormous. He's saying he's no tall. By what means? I believe he was like 6'5" or something like this. Bit of a pick-me attitude from you, Richard, you know, try to say he's not tall when he's literally like towering over everyone. So at this point, we're in the early 50s, Richard is a teenager and he's decided he's going to drop out of school because reading? Nah. Writing? Who needs it? But bludgeoning people to death in alleyways? That is the kind of extracurricular activity that Richard could get on board with. So Richard at this point, bearing in mind he's already said at 14 years old he's committed his first murder, but his first premeditated murder, he said that was done between the ages of 13 and 16. You know, one he had actually thought about and planned. And this time it wasn't for revenge against a school bully. This time he simply did it for fun. He just said, I bet him until he stopped moving. And then when he stopped moving, I bet him some more and it felt real good. And this is a guy that honestly, the minute he was born, he should have just been kept in a cage because he is not good for anyone. Now, as with his first apparent murder victim, Richard stated that he dumped this body in the South Bronx as well, which would become a very popular dumping ground of his because, you know, if you're not in school, you need some sort of routine. And what we need to remember is this is pre-DNA, pre-CCTV, pre-anyone really caring or giving a damn about a troubled kid who went missing in a bad neighbourhood. And Richard Kuklinski, he didn't just stop at fists or metal poles. He would actually experiment with the different ways of murdering. So he would try out different weapons, different tactics. He wanted to see just how long it would take for people to die under certain conditions. Like science, but make it murder, because practice makes psycho. And it's honestly just absolutely horrifying. But this man, he would brag that he would practice murders on homeless men. Men who were simply down on their luck, They hadn't done anything to him, they hadn't done anything to anyone. And yet Richard would approach them in the street in their vulnerable state, and he would attack them with steel pipes and metal and different weapons. He was testing to see what weapon you could bludgeon someone with that would inflict the most pain, but would also cause a quiet death. He wanted something that acted fast, he wanted something that was quiet, but more than that, he wanted to feel satisfied by what he had done. True evil. And this is in this guy's own words, but he said, if I wanted to kill someone, I just did it, and I didn't think twice. And this guy, he didn't even know half of his victims, he didn't know their names, so it's like it was harder to identify people because he could tell you how many killings he's done, but it was very rare that he could tell you their names. And what is just so cold about this as well is this guy didn't care how many lives he ruined through murder. He had even said, I didn't care if they had a family. They meant nothing to me. They were just another problem that I had to eliminate. Okay, calm down, Dexter. And this is where the plot just continues to thicken, because this wasn't enough for Richard to just be out there murdering people. He wanted to, he wanted to do this full time. He wanted a career out of it, shall we say. And whilst his body count is stacking up, he starts getting involved with organised crime. And because he's getting involved with organised crime, very soon the Gambino family, who, if you know Mafia, you know the Gambino family, okay? But they hear about this massive 6'5" meat tank of a man who's willing to kill anybody for the right price. And they start paying attention to him. So Richard had stated that his introduction to the Gambino crime family came from a guy called Roy DeMeo. He was a real-life mobster and a real-life hitman within the Gambino family. Now, DeMeo, he ran a crew which was basically a murder-for-hire crew. And allegedly, Richard Kuklinski, he would start doing some freelance work for them. So Richard Kuklinski had stated that Roy DeMeo, he wanted him to prove himself, prove that he could do this for the Gambino family. So he hands Richard a pistol and he tells Richard to go up to a random man in the street who's just out walking his dog one day and murder him. Richard didn't think about it, didn't hesitate, didn't take a moment to process what was being asked of him. He walked up to this man who was just out walking his dog and he shot him in the head, dead in the street. And DeMeo's reaction to this? He simply stated, I like this guy. Sorry, I have no idea where the makeup got up to. I went to go and make my lunch because I was starving, and I made 2 different lunches because I ruined both of them. So now I just feel angry and unsatisfied. So I'm just going to take my rage out on this POS and go from there. So Richard, at this point, he has himself a fancy new job title. He's feeling very cool, and his job title is contract killer. Now, he did claim between the mid-1950s to the mid-1980s that he had killed anywhere between 100 people. Again, can we trust what old Richard says? Not really, but there would be some substance to his claims. And I have to be honest, right? If this guy, if he was a liar, which, granted, I think he lied about a few of the killings, but if he was a complete liar, he was a very detailed one. I had to list exactly what it was that he had done, because if I didn't list it, I would have forgot. So he had said that he had poisoned people, stabbed them, shot them, strangled them with rope, bludgeoned them with tire irons, and sometimes he just froze their bodies and stored them in industrial freezers to confuse the time of death, to throw off investigators. And this would be how he would get his nickname, the Iceman. Because baby bro, he was fond of freezers. And I honestly think if this guy had been like a good human being and not a lousy POS that he is he probably could have went into science, because everything he did was like a bloody science experiment. He would store bodies for days, weeks, months, years, and then he would just randomly dump them one day. He's like, do you know what, you've frozen for a while now. You've actually been frozen for 2 months, 3 days, 7 hours and 23 minutes. So I think it's time that we just dump you. So he would dump the bodies, and then he would just laugh his ass off at the thought of these investigators trying to work out when these people died. This man literally weaponized the fridge freezer business. And Richard's a busy dude, right? But no one's too busy for love. And it would be around this time that he would start crafting this double life, and he would meet Barbara Pedrici. The pair would marry in 1961. They had 2 daughters and a son. Just realised I rhymed. Truly, I'm always spitting bars in these cases, I swear. And with this, to the outward public, Richard would play the doting father and the caring husband, but behind closed doors, it was very different. And Richard, he would play the doting father, the caring husband, you know, when he's not like shoving cyanide pills down someone's throat. But again, even this whole act of doting husband and caring father, or caring father and doting husband, that's exactly what I just said. Anywho, even with this, it would only be to the public, because this complete POS scumbag, cretin loser freak, he was a horrible person even to those who loved him. Now, Barbara would later state that she had no idea what her husband was up to. She had genuinely not a Scooby what he was up to. But what she did confirm is that she had always known that Richard had a very volatile, very dangerous temper. And she admitted at one point that he was very abusive and physical toward her within the family home. Richard would constantly beat Barbara. He was threatening his own children, and he would fly into a rage if dinner wasn't on the table when he got home. Barbara had said that if Richard said something, it was law, and if you didn't do it, it was consequences. So we've not just got a cold-blooded serial killer loser, we've also got a domestic tyrant who terrorises his own household. Now, just a little bit about their relationship. So Barbara, she had met Richard in the mid-1950s. She was only 18 years old at the time, and she was working for a trucking company in North Bergen, New Jersey. Barbara later stated that when she met Richard, she was completely swept off her feet. And this wasn't because she thought Richard was charming. This was because he seemed stable. He seemed like a provider, someone strong, stable and mature. And boy did she get it wrong, because spoiler alert, the red flags, they were flapping like they were in a hurricane wind. They were just flashing everywhere. But Barbara was young and fallen in love, and she didn't see them right away. So as I earlier stated, the pair of them got married in 1961, and Barbara did say that the first few years of marriage, they weren't perfect, but they were normal. They seemed stable. He was somewhat romantic, depending on what kind of day he had. But it wouldn't take very long before the cracks started to show. And I'm sure we can all imagine, you know, what the cracks are that I'm talking about. But basically, whilst Barbara's at home raising 3 children, Richard Kuklinski, he's just out doing, well, everything that I've told you. Now, at home with his children, he would, you know, try and play the part of the doting father. He would host barbecues, he would read bedtime stories to his children, buy them puppies, take them to church. But behind closed doors, when things didn't go his way, that is when everything would change. Barbara had said if dinner wasn't ready, he would choke her. If she spoke too much, he would hit her. One time, he even took a knife to Barbara's throat and threatened to slit her throat whilst the children were in the other room. Let's just call him Father of the Year. And this family man facade was literally just that. It was yet another thing he could weaponise. He could use it against his own family. He'll play the part, but don't you dare cross him. He'll play the part, but don't you dare upset him. He was just constantly using fear to control everyone in that household. It was just this terrifying place to live, and his children, they were terrified of him. They felt so threatened and unsettled by him, but they didn't really realise at the time why that was. And it wouldn't really be until much later, when they could understand what he was doing, that they would realise why they were so afraid. Now, Richard was known to be incredibly manipulative, and he would do the tale as old as time when it comes to these evil abusers. So he would beat Barbara, threaten his children, and then right after it, when he realises what's happened and that Barbara might not take his crap much longer, he would then turn soft. He would be like jelly, and he would tell Barbara that he's sorry, he wasn't himself, he's under pressure. He would promise to be better next time, like textbook narcissistic abuse. And he would break them down, beg for forgiveness, until next time. Now, Barbara, she would eventually realise that something just wasn't right with Richard. Like, not take away the abuse, take that out of the picture, we're not thinking about that right now, but it's like he was out to all hours during the night. He would come back, he looked very suspicious, he would come home with cash that he couldn't explain, and sometimes he would just fly into these fits of rage. Again, no rhyme, no reason. And yet Barbara stayed with him because she knew leaving this kind of man wasn't really an option for her. Barbara stated that she knew if she ever left him, she would be dead, and potentially the children as well. And listen, I wasn't there, but based on everything that we've learned so far about Richard, I'm going to say that tracks. Barbara, she did her absolute best to try and shield the children from Richard's wrath, but unfortunately they couldn't be completely spared from his rage. He never abused them as severely as what he did Barbara. I mean, don't get me wrong, any abuse is severe, but Barbara definitely took the brunt of it. But he would use fear and intimidation as his parenting tools. His son had stated that from a very, very young age, he learned to notice when something was wrong with dad. One minute he could be sitting watching cartoons with his children, and the next minute he's broke a door in half. Like, could you imagine being 8 years old and sitting there wondering, is dad gonna hug me or is he gonna strangle the family dog? And that was life inside that household. That is what that creepy POS would do to his own bloody family. And the thing is, whilst they know he's not a good person, whilst they know he's violent, he's abusive, he's narcissistic, they had no idea that this man was murdering. This man didn't only deceive a neighbourhood and a town, he was able to deceive his own wife and his own children. Despite them knowing the qualities he had, they still could never believe that he would be a serial killer. So here we have it, Richard Kuklinski, right? He is currently working as a hitman for the Mafia. He is also working as one of Satan's representatives on God's green earth. And we're not even in the deep end yet, because we've not even really spoke about the kills that we actually know are confirmed. So that's what we're going to dive into now. We're going to dive into his victims, how they were murdered, and the crazy ass ways that this monster made them disappear. So starting off, we've got George Moliband. Now, he was a man with ties to the mob, and he had the deadly misfortune of pissing off the Iceman. So George, he had left one day to go and meet Richard. They were going to meet in a van, which, you know, big mistake. Huge. Now, what exactly happened inside this van when it came to whatever kicked off between George and Richard, we don't really know. But Richard Kuklinski, he would state that George Moliband had threatened to kill him, and he was like, oh hell no, I'm the Iceman. I'm the big daddy around here. I'm the Mafia's hitman. So he just turned around, pulled out a gun, and shot George 5 times in the chest at point blank range inside this van. And not only that, but George, he was kept inside this van in the back seat, being drove around like it was some kind of sick, twisted horror movie Uber ride. Eventually, George's body would be disposed of in barrels, and he would never be seen again. And it was years later when Richard would confess to this murder, and the police hadn't even had any idea about it. And let me tell you something, when Richard Kuklinski spoke about how he killed George, how he disposed of George's body and all the sick and twisted ways behind it, it was like he was giving you a guide on how to trim a hedge. It was so casual, so simplistic. This was just normal for him. And Richard had stated to the police when he was talking about it, he says, well, George insulted me, so I killed him. Okay, Richard. All I'm going to say is thank God he's not alive to watch this video, otherwise I could be in trouble. I mean, you know me, I like to insult these freaks. And I know I briefly stated earlier about the kill that got him nicknamed the Iceman, but I will tell you in detail now. So this was a guy called Louis Maskey. He was a New Jersey businessman who had vanished in 1981. But here's where it gets twisted. As Louis Maskey, he vanishes in 1981. But his body wasn't found until 1983. And when his body was found, police, coroners, everyone involved, they commented on how fresh his body looked. Like it was fresher than fresh. He didn't seem to be decomposing, at least not at the rate that they would expect for someone who's been missing for 2 years. But it turns out Richard Kuklinski, he had kept Louis's body in this like industrial freezer for 2 years. And then he decides 2 years later, time to dump this. This was his way of playing with the police, messing with the public, the investigators, throwing off the timeline so it couldn't be tracked. Then in 1982, we have Paul Hoffman. So he was a pharmacist. And Paul, I mean, it's just no good. So Paul basically thinks that he can buy drugs off Richard Kuklinski. He can buy them at a discount and then sell them as a profit. And that was just a bad idea. So Paul, he goes to meet Richard at a warehouse, right? So he walks in and Richard's just chilling like the villain he is. He's calm, cool, collected, the 3 C's, the 3 important C's. So Paul walks over to him and Richard is sitting with a hamburger. And he says to Paul, hey, you hungry? Do you want a hamburger? Here, it's got cheese, all the good stuff. Help yourself, enjoy. But what Paul didn't realise is that this hamburger, this cheeseburger, was laced with cyanide. Cyanide. And if that's no peak Iceman, I don't know what is. So the thing is Richard Kuklinski goes to the effort of giving Paul the cyanide-filled hamburger, but he wouldn't allow it enough time to work. He was getting impatient. He's like, this guy, he's been living too long. He gets impatient and then shoots this guy in the head before the cyanide even has time to kick in. His body would then be squashed and folded into a steel drum. This steel drum was then left behind a store for years. Murder barrel is outside a store, no one looks in it. Next we have Daniel Deppner. Daniel's body was found decomposing in 1983 inside the back of a parked green Pontiac. And here's the kicker. The car had been abandoned in the same spot for well over a month, undiscovered. And it would be hikers that would finally find his body after they were able to smell it from on the hiking trail. Like they are sniffing out this vehicle because it smells like death. Now Kuklinski, he had basically poisoned Daniel, wrapped him in a bedsheet, and then left him to rot in the back of this vehicle. And you might be wondering, why was Daniel killed? What did he do? Like, what was his problem? Well, Richard Kuklinski, he had decided that Daniel spoke too much. He just talked, and he was worried that one day Daniel might talk a bit too much about what he's up to. Guilty conscience. And that is a scary thing about Richard, is all it took was for him to mildly suspect that you might be disloyal. That's it, time's up, lights out, night night. So then we have Gary Smith. Now Gary was a low-level accomplice and he was currently staying at a motel in North Bergen. Now would it shock you if I told you that Richard, he comes swinging by Gary's motel, he's got some nice warm fresh food for Gary, and this food would be laced with cyanide. Now he said that he measured it properly this time because he wanted a nice clean job. Spoiler alert, doesn't work, because again, Gary apparently takes too long to die, and so he gets strangled to death by a lamp cord. A lamp cord. And not only this, but Gary's lifeless body would be stuffed under this motel bed and just left to rot. And what is honestly just so disgusting and terrifying is the fact that his body was left under there undiscovered for days. guests at that motel came and went, and his body was under the bed. Like, could you imagine staying in that room and there is a decomposing body just 2 feet away from you? I'd be hopping right on TripAdvisor, 0 stars, would not recommend to a friend. And like, what is it with Richard? Like, his weapon of choice is everything and anything that he can possibly get his wee grubby hands on. This guy, if he could imagine using it, he's going to give it a good old-fashioned try, because you never know, you might find a new weapon. But as we know, he would mostly use guns. Cyanide was probably his favourite weapon to use, even though like it never worked the way he wanted it to. He also used knives, chainsaws, ice picks, ropes, and then there was poison, and of course the freezers. Oh, and actually, no, sorry, there was also explosives, because he blew up at least one guy. Kuklinski had also bragged that he had once used a crossbow to kill someone. Now, why did he do this? He wanted to see if a crossbow could penetrate a skull, and as it turns out, yes it can. He had stated, "I shot him through the forehead. It was instant, like a light switch." This guy is so beyond sick and twisted. See, even though we know this guy was not the perfect family man he made himself out to be, for outsiders looking in, that's exactly how he came across. He looked like the guy that took his kids to church, had the barbecues, watched cartoons with them. But the thing is this guy, he was going out and murdering people, and then coming home and watching cartoons with his kids immediately after, before then flying into a fit of rage. This guy was a walking horror movie wearing a little red sweater. So as we know, Richard, he's the kind of guy, he can't hold his own water. Like, if he's got something to spill, he wants to give everyone the tea, right? No secrets here with Richard. So he's bragging, and he's bragging a lot about the murders he's committing, how he's committing them, how many people he's killed, etc, etc. And you know what it's like in the mob. You know, they're all one big happy family until they're not. Until someone snitches. And the FBI, somehow, not pointing fingers, but somehow they start hearing about what Richard's up to. And they start thinking, he's very, very cocky, very arrogant, and seems to think he's smarter than everyone else. Let's play with him a wee bit. And this is when we meet Dominic Polyphron. So Dominic, he was an undercover agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms. And this would be the very man that would melt the Iceman, that's going to bring the Iceman down, who's going to crush the Iceman like a bit of ice. So Dominic's job was infiltrate the Iceman, and he was going to pretend to be a fellow contracted hitman by the name of Dom Rossi. So the idea was that he was going to sort of befriend Richard, sort of get him on side. He was going to be like, "Oh, I'm a hitman, you're a hitman, we should totally have a drink sometime, talk about our hits." And you know Richard, he can't resist bragging about his hits, and Dominic, he was hoping that when Richard starts to brag, he'll be able to catch it all on tape. You know, the classic wire. And this, my friends, is where we start to unravel this freezer-loving fiend. So Polyphron, or as Richard's going to know him, Dom Rossi, he approaches Richard and he's like, "I hear you're a hitman. I'm also a hitman, and I've got a double hitman job. Do you want to be my partner?" And Richard, he takes the bait like it's cyanide in a hamburger. He's like, "Absolutely, my new friend. Who are we killing?" But not only did Richard agree to do this, he was also giving Dom Rossi advice on the best ways to murder people. And Richard had stated to Dom, or Dominic as we know him, you don't want them to smell the cyanide. You want to put that in a sandwich or a pill, or spray it in their face real clean. It's like, real clean? Sir, we're talking about cyanide poisoning here, literal chemical warfare, and you're acting as though you're giving your car a wee spring refresh at the car wash. He also starts bragging to Dom, like, you know, you want the best hitman, I'm the best hitman, I've got 100 hits under my belt, guns, ice picks, cyanide, pick your weapon, I've done it. Richard had even admitted to using nasal sprays. A nasal spray to relieve colds and flus, like a wee Sudafed up the nose. He was using that, putting cyanide in nasal sprays. Just can't trust anything or anyone. There would be several meetings between Richard and Dom Rossi, and these meetings, they would all be taped. And there was hours and hours worth of tapes. Richard just talking about all these killings, how he did them, these weapons, where they were buried, how he buried them. It was just insane. He had claimed that he poisoned a man at a bus terminal and then just toddled off like nothing happened. An innocent man, a man who had no dealings with him whatsoever. He also stated that he had fed one of his victims' bodies to rats in a cave because he wanted to see how long it would take for rats to devour a body. He also laughed and bragged about shooting a man in the head, murdering him, then going home immediately after and eating his lunch, claiming that he had worked up an appetite. I mean, he really is just a complete sick freak. And you know what's even more hilarious about all of this, right, is Kuklinski's laughing with this fellow hitman, and he's bragging away like, oh, the FBI, like, they've not found me, I'm so good at my job, nah, nah, nah. And you're literally sitting with an agent who's got a wire, who's recording your every word, whilst you laugh about how smart you think you are, and you're in like the dumbest situation. So the agent at this point, Dominic, he has all these recordings, right? And it's all Richard admitting to these murders that he's committed, the weapons used, blah, blah, blah. But that's all talk. There's no actually any real evidence of this taking place. So they decide the best way to really catch him in the act is to set up a fake hit. See if he would attend. Would he actually commit a hit? Because that would give them the damning evidence that they needed. So Dominic, you know, under the alias of Dom Rossi, he goes to Richard and he says, listen, I've got a job for us. We need to kill this guy via cyanide poisoning. The idea is that you're going to poison this fellow, you're going to get paid $85,000, and then you just disappear into the night like Batman. And Richard says, hell yeah, sounds like a bit of me. Give me a date and a time and I'm going to be there. Well, the date was December the 17th of 1986. So Polythrone, or as Richard knows him, is Dom Rossi. He hands Richard the cyanide. He tells him where the target is and where they should meet. Of course, there was no cyanide in the capsules that were provided, but Richard doesn't know that, and that's the important thing. So he gets in his truck, he heads off to commit this crime. But the hit was never going to happen, because the minute he gets in his truck, eager to perform this hit, the FBI move in right away and arrest him. He was arrested at a truck stop in North Bergen, New Jersey, so, you know, Merry Christmas, Richard. So police and investigators, they obtain a warrant to search Richard's home. I mean, obviously they're going to get a warrant because this guy is basically being caught in the wind. They would find guns, poison supplies, there was evidence of certain murders, there was evidence of extensive stalking and also surveillance, and then there was like hidden compartments within the basement which contained, you know, things like cyanide. Now Barbara, his wife, when the police come like barging through the door, she's in complete shock. They tell her what Richard's been up to and she's like, What do you mean he's a hitman? He told me he's in the business of selling film reels. Barbara, he might be, if those are snuff films, but apart from that, darling, I don't think he's in the business he said he was in. So Kuklinski, thank God, he would eventually be charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, multiple weapons violations, attempted murder, conspiracy, basically every other charge you can get related to being a hitman. Now, the Iceman, he would face the death penalty, but, you know, as a lot of these monsters do, in March of 1988, he had agreed to make a plea deal in exchange for 2 life sentences. So he would plead guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder. And by doing this would give him the possibility of parole after 60 years. But I mean, let's be honest, little bro at that point is not going to have much life left in him. And you'd think now that Iceman is behind bars that he would, you know, just sit down, shut up in his little 6x9 cell, mind his business and do his time. But no, because Richard really liked to talk. Do you know how he would like kill people for talking too much? Turns out probably should have killed himself because no one liked to talk as much as Richard. He decided to star in his own little documentary where he would dish all the juicy gossipy details about the horrific crimes he committed. In 1992, HBO, they would release their first documentary regarding the Iceman called The Iceman Tapes, Conversations with a Killer. And let me tell you, in this, Richard Kuklinski was in full dead-eye psycho mode because he wasn't a mumbling, trembling man trying to remember a story he's made up. He could word for word, detail for detail, tell you exactly what he did to all of his victims. He was crossed arm, he was monotone, he was dressed in his little beige outfit. And for 90 minutes, this man just had some remorseless, chilling storytelling to do. During these interviews, this monster, he would just smile whilst he spoke about how he murdered his victims. He would laugh and smile whilst he described feeding one of his victims to rats. He had described murder as just business. Just business being taken care of. I mean, listen, do you think the family members of these victims will see that as just business? No. He was laughing at his own killing methods like he was some sort of sick, terrible stand-up comedian. He would be diagnosed as having antisocial personality disorder, paranoid traits, explosive, uncontrolled rage, and also a complete lack of any empathy or conscience. So, in other words, he was a high-functioning psychopath. Now, people did state one of the most horrifying things about Richard Kuklinski was before he opened his mouth, he seemed like any other normal guy. But then he opened his mouth and you're like, oh, holy crap, what's that? And it's like, it wasn't screaming or shouting, but it was the fact that he delivered these horrifying stories so calmly in a conversational tone. That made it 10 times worse for anyone who was listening. Richard had stated that after the first kill, it gets easier. After the second kill, even easier. And after your third kill, that's when you get creative. Like, I'm sorry. Do you know that you are not running an Etsy shop? Like, why? Creativity? Where? Listen, is this guy crazier than crazy? Absolutely. But are all his confessions true? That's hard to say. Some criminologists, journalists, law enforcement, they actually believe that this man had either exaggerated or invented a lot of his stories. He once claimed that he killed Jimmy Hoffa. No evidence. He claimed he worked alongside the Gambino family. Limited evidence. Apparently he buried people in barrels across New York and New Jersey. Again, no body, no evidence, no proof. But I guess the question that we would all have is, was he lying? Probably, at least partly. But the thing is, even if half of it was fiction, the confirmed murders, the murders that police know he committed and was committed by him 100%, they're horrifying enough. But I have to say, Richard was honestly living his best life in prison because in prison, all the other inmates feared him. He was known as the boogeyman. And despite his size, his age, his health issues, nobody messed with him. He was known to be cold, violent and unpredictable even in his older age. He had even once stated, if I wanted to kill someone in here, I'd just do it. I'd go to sleep like nothing happened. So I mean, like, sleep tight, cellmates, and good luck. Another thing with Richard is that he wasn't one of these killers that years later they're saying how remorseful they are and how sorry they are. And in fact, he was as cold as ever. One of his statements had said the following: I'm sorry for the families, I truly am, but I can't change what I've done, which would sound maybe somewhat like an apology if he didn't follow up with the next part. But if I had the chance, I'd probably do it all again. Okay, see, that's just creepy. And this man is incapable of shutting up, because had he just shut up at the first line, we could have been like, okay, maybe he has some remorse somewhere deep down in the pits of hell. But obviously not. By the early 2000s, Richard's health was deteriorating at a rapid pace. He would be transferred from Trenton State Prison to St. Francis Medical Centre that was in Trenton, New Jersey. This guy, he was in his late 60s, he's got heart disease, he's got phlebitis, arthritis, just, you know, a lot of karma was kind of creeping in there. Now, in his final weeks, Barbara, the wife, she had been asked if Richard's heart should stop, should we resuscitate him? And she just very coldly and calmly turned around and said to them, no. DNR that man, get it wrote on a bright yellow post-it note, stick it to the end of his bed, make sure no one attempts to wake this man up. Thankfully, Richard Kuklinski, he would die on March the 5th of 2006 at the age of 70. Now, his official cause of death was cardiac arrest, but in true Iceman fashion, there was some rumours to accompany it. Just before he died, he had agreed to testify against a Gambino family associate. Now, the reason he was going to do this is because there was going to be leniencies or perks that he could get in prison. And conveniently, he would die just before that could happen. Now, was it natural causes? Or did someone else decide that the Iceman himself could not shut up and therefore had to be taken care of? We're never really going to know for sure, but what I do know for sure is that it's some kind of mob-style mic drop. And of course, as always, I do want to send thoughts and prayers to every single innocent victim in this case who became a victim of this horrific man and did not deserve to even be in the same vicinity as him. My thoughts, love and prayer is with all of the family members of the victims. But my loves, that is it for another true crime and makeup episode. I am so intrigued to hear what you think about this. Do you think the Iceman was telling the truth? Do you think he has 100 victims? Or do you think he is just a frickin' liar? Please leave all your thoughts, feelings, theories and opinions down below. If there's anything I've missed out, leave that down below as well. I mean, I'm one person. I'm out here trying to do it all, you know? I might miss things here and there, so if I have, please let me know down below and I'll pin your comment. But that is it for today. Please remember to leave a like, comment and subscribe. It really helps with the algorithm, helps boost me out to YouTube, and hopefully, possibly, I'll be able to do this full time one day. Let me know what case you would like to see from me on Sunday, but that is it for today. Please, please, please remember, be a good person, do not be a bad person, stay safe, look after each other, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!